All right. We need something. We desperately need something. We need somebody to track all the endless corrupt trials that are happening in the United States of America, especially this year, because this year's going to be unlike anything we've seen. It's going to be insane. Awful, but insane. And how are we supposed to keep straight on all that? I can't help you. Josh Hammer can, though. My buddy Josh Hammer has a new podcast launching today. It is titled, well, hold on, America on Trial. Is it America on Trial with Josh Hammer? Josh, is it America on Trial with Josh Hammer? Is it just America on Trial? Is my face going to be anywhere on this thing? Tell me about this podcast.
Jesse, great to join you as always. Yeah, so really excited to launch this new show today at the First, America on Trial. America on Trial with Josh Hammer would be the full title, but I think on Apple and Spotify, you can find it just at America on Trial. So we're going to come to you every morning with short, digestible, 12 to 15 on the shorter end, 15 to 20 minute on the longer end episodes. We're going to go around the horn. That's what we're calling the opening segment, where I'm going to go through all of the various trials. We'll go to Alvin Bragg. We'll go to Fani Willis. We'll go to Jack Smith. We'll go to the Hunter Biden gun and tax charges, Donald Trump, the 14th Amendment ballot access stuff, the civil lawsuit with Tish James, the Attorney General in New York. There's just so much stuff. Egene Carol, the defamation lawsuit. It is a lot. There is a lot going on right now, and there really is no one show that is tracking it all for you, that is telling you what you need to pay attention to. And then every day, Jesse, we're going to do a deep dive on an issue of the day. So, for example, on our launch episode today, I did a deep dive on the damages that were awarded just on Friday afternoon in the Egene Carol defamation case, this outrageous $65 million in punitive damages on top of 18 plus million in compensatory damages, probably outright unconstitutional in my view and my understanding of the relevant legal doctrine. So there's really no one doing this show, Jesse, so we're really excited to launch it there. And yeah, go ahead and subscribe right now to America on Trial.
Yeah, there is nobody doing the show, and I'm glad you're doing it because I need to understand these things. In fact, break down this Egene Carol thing because, look, Josh, there's 1,000 stories and scandals every day. All I remember about this woman is she was a nut job to the point the media stopped having her on. She was very clearly a deranged nut job, accused Trump of some really horrible things, and yet he's got to stroke her an $80 million check? Why?
So it is confusing. So in 2019, Egene Carol comes forward with allegations that Donald Trump groped her, sexually assaulted her in the dressing room or the back area of a Bergdorf Goodman off Fifth Avenue in New York City 25 years ago or so. And she immediately filed 2 lawsuits, both civil lawsuits, because the criminal statute limitations on these relevant crimes had long expired. So she could only go the civil route. So earlier last year, in the first of the 2 lawsuits, the jury awarded her $5 million in damages for both defamation and sexual assault. Defamation comes in here because after she came out to the New Yorker, the liberal rag, back in 2019, that's who published this story where she was talking about this alleged sexual assault. After that, when Trump was sitting as the acting president, he spouted off on her, said that she's a liar, she's this, she's that. Jesse, my quick take on this, and I'm sure you'd agree on this, is, what man would not spout off on a woman who is saying things that he believes to be completely fabricated and false from 25, 30 years ago? I remember watching the Brett Kavanaugh hearing in September 2018 with Christine Blasey Ford, when Brett Kavanaugh got up there and he was defiant. He stood up straight in his chair. He didn't literally pound his chest, but that's kind of what it felt like. And he accused the Senate Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee of seeking revenge for the Clintons. And there were some people then in 2018 who said, oh, Brett Kavanaugh is not acting judicial. This is not the comportment we want from a Supreme Court justice. To which I said, nonsense. That is BS. I would never want a man sitting on the Supreme Court who is not going to defend his reputation when it is besmirched and smeared in this fashion. So that's kind of how I feel about Donald Trump, too. So in any event, last year, $5 million in defamation. But you had this second lawsuit, and this second lawsuit, they finally reached The verdict or the jury reached its verdict in federal court this past Friday, $18.3 million in compensatory damages, which means that that's all she needed to make whole. Not entirely sure how they arrived at that. And then because they were feeling vindictive, they slapped $65 million in punitive damages on top of that. Highly, highly unusual. That ratio of punitive to compensatory damages of over 3-to-1 is probably unconstitutional as well, but Trump's going to appeal it. I think he'll probably be successful on appeal.
Okay, let's set that aside. People can go get all the details from your podcast. Again, podcast is America on Trial. Let's stay in New York for a minute, Josh, and just hit the high points on the Tish James, Letitia James. What's she doing? A lot of people don't realize there are two separate things going on in New York. What's she doing?
Well, there's actually three separate things going on in New York, if you want to include the Alvin Bragg criminal prosecution. I mean, that was the first of four criminal prosecutions out of the gate. People have forgotten about this because the Fonnie Wilson case in Georgia and the two federal prosecutions from Jack Smith in Florida and Washington, D.C. are getting all the attention, and properly so. The Alvin Bragg case was panned across the board. Even the liberal commentators on CNN had a very hard time defending it, the Jake Tappers of the world. No one really was trying to defend this prosecution that Alvin Bragg was bringing there. But anyway, you have that, and you have this Egene Carol case, the defamation cases, which are also being held in federal court there in New York. And then in state court, you have the Attorney General of New York, Tish James, who ran just as Alvin Bragg ran for district attorney in Manhattan. Tish James ran on an explicitly Get Trump platform, Jesse. She was not hiding the ball. She made very clear that she was running for office in no small part to try to use the power of the state to file litigation to get Donald Trump. And sure enough, that is what she has done. So she has filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump and against the Trump organization, essentially alleging that they have run this organization in fraudulent fashion, that they have undervalued their properties in order to get certain tax breaks, that they have misrepresented their holdings to the financial institutions and the banks in order to secure more favorable loans, things of the nature there. And she's seeking $370 million in damages there. You have a justice named Justice Ngoron, who is the sitting judge in this case. He, like many of these other judges, is vehemently anti-Trump there. So Trump is facing an uphill climb there. It's totally unjust. And Jesse, it also should be chilling for anyone who ever wants to start a business in New York State, that the power of the state could be used in this fashion to try to bankrupt your business simply because you don't agree with the way the banks appraised your property.
Okay, I'm sorry to stay in New York, but one last thing on this before we move on. I want to get to this Texas Supreme Court dust up, but the Alvin Bragg trial. Obviously, anyone with a brain understands that Donald Trump is legally in a great deal of trouble for his D.C. trial just because of the jury pool. The judge, the jury pool, he's in a great deal of trouble. New York City is not exactly rural Oklahoma. Is he in trouble there?
He probably is, at least because, for the very simple reason of the jury pool, right? I mean, again, we're talking here about Manhattan. I mean, this is New York County, New York. I mean, this is one of the most liberal counties in the United States. If it was Staten Island, maybe slightly different story. Staten Island actually is the only red county of the 5 counties that collectively comprise New York City. But in Manhattan and in New York County, you're not going to get a favorable jury pool for Donald Trump, to put it mildly there. This case is just so laughably frivolous, Jesse, that I have to think that when it is inevitably appealed, if it does come out against Trump, then the appellate court in New York State probably would ultimately rule in Trump's favor there. Obviously, it's very hard to make these predictions without seeing how the trial unfolds there, but the appellate courts in New York State and their state courts tend to be at least a little more legitimate there. You're not dealing with an inherently biased jury pool of that matter. The $1 million question, Jesse, of course, is, the timeline such that this appeal might happen in New York State or the appeal might happen down in Georgia in the Fonnie Willis case. Will Trump be president of the United States by that time? And if he actually is president while he is simultaneously dealing with these state prosecutions in Georgia and New York State, at that point, what happens? Do the prosecutors just drop it? Or, it's literally uncharted waters, which, shameless plug, that's why this podcast is needed.
Yeah, no, it is friggin' needed. Okay, what happened between the Supreme Court and Texas? Because there's a lot of, what's that word? Misinformation out there.
There's a ton of misinformation. So I read the order. I read the judicial order from the U.S. Supreme Court last week, which, by the way, Jesse, first, it must be said that not just John Roberts, but Amy Coney Barrett, unfortunately, went quite wobbly on this one. This is a big case, and to put it mildly, and unfortunately, one of Trump's nominees, Amy Coney Barrett, actually voted with the liberals on this one. The judicial order basically says that the Border Patrol, in this case, the Border Patrol that is working under the Joe Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas, that they have permission to go down to the Rio Grande, go down to the border, and to snip the razor wire that Texas, the Department of Public Safety, the Texas Rangers, Greg Abbott, that all of them have put up. Here is what the judicial order does not say. So it permits the Border Patrol agents to go there instead. It does not enjoin, meaning it does not forbid Texas from putting up additional razor wire. So right now, if Texas wanted to put up additional razor wire all along the Rio Grande, they could do so, and they would not be willfully violating the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, again, the Border Patrol, according to this order, can go in and snip down that wire. So what you essentially could come to is a Mexican standoff, pun very much intended, where it's basically a question as to who drops their weapon first. I mean, will it be Texas if they're putting up new wire, or will it be the Border Patrol? They're allegedly going to start snipping wire. Now, the people who are kind of wetting their beds here and are saying, oh my God, this is a constitutional crisis, this is John C. Calhoun and nullification. It's actually none of that. In our constitutional system, Jesse, both the federal government and the states have sovereign power. In fact, the states created the federal government in the first place. They were sovereign entities when they created the federal government, when they ceded limited enumerated powers to that federal government. And as Antonin Scalia wrote quite prolifically in the 2012 case, Arizona versus United States, if the states thought that they would give up sovereignty as a condition of creating the federal government, they never would have created the federal government in the first place. So Texas has every right to keep out this invasion from its border. I sincerely hope that Greg Abbott keeps on doing so. This is not nullification. This is not relitigating the Civil War. This is not a constitutional crisis. If anything, it is a crisis of sovereignty, and it is a crisis of national civics that people fail to understand the virtue and the righteousness with which Greg Abbott is acting.